Career Q, we are talking with Nina Johal. Nina is the leader of the Executive Talent Acquisition function at Microsoft. She's been at Microsoft since 1993 and has held various roles in both the staffing and HR generalist functions, and has worked in the US, Canada, India, and Singapore. In her current role, she is responsible for overseeing all leadership recruiting, executive succession planning, and board of director placements. As part of the Global Talent Acquisition Leadership Team, Nina is involved in shaping the future direction of talent acquisition for the company. And I'm thrilled to have Nina on the Career Q today and talking with us about networking.
This is the Career Q, the podcast focused on helping you navigate the signals in your career to keep you growing and moving forward in business and in life. Here's today's host, Danna Redmond.
Welcome, Nina.
Thank you. It's great to be on the show with you.
I'm so excited to have you with us and talking about this very important topic about networking. You know, we hear so frequently that networking is important during a job search. Why do you think that is?
That's such a great question. What I would say is I think that networking can increase your chances, meaning increasing your odds of landing a job. And when I think about the concept of networking and contrast that as an example to the act of applying for a job, for me, applying for a job is much more of a one-to-one transaction. But when you network with just one person, that one connection can turn into multiple connections. And one of the things I like to talk to people about is the actual definition of a network. And when you look it up in the dictionary, some of the definitions are it's an arrangement of intersecting horizontal and vertical lines. It's a net-like combination of filaments or passages, and it's a group or system of interconnected people or things. So when I think about the possibility of making a connection with one person and then that person connecting you to another, it almost becomes a ripple effect. So I think there's just the law of odds in terms of expanding your opportunities of landing a job or just making connections with a variety of people. The other thing I'll say is when I think about the importance of networking is a lot of jobs just aren't easily visible to you as an individual in the open market. And right, and there's lots of times when a certain job isn't even open yet or it doesn't even exist, but you've had an interaction or an opportunity to network with someone and you plant a seed in their brain in terms of what you might have to offer, and even that you're just looking for your next role. And oftentimes that lands you into a real opportunity in the future. I've actually experienced that myself in my career, so it's something I love to chat with people about.
I'd love to hear that. How did networking impact your own career?
Yeah, you know, I will try to keep the story as concise as possible. But when I first moved from Canada to the U.S. and I was working in the HR space, I think one of the challenges when you move from one country to another is you're in a different environment in terms of even employment law. And so I actually joined the local chapter of SHRM in the Bellevue area. And one of my reasons for doing that was to build up my own skill and knowledge of the U.S. employment market. And what I ended up doing, and this could be a very long story, as I said, but I ended up volunteering to be a member of the board. And I'll talk a little bit about this later, too. I think doing things like that and making yourself a little bit more visible in some of these networking scenarios gives you an opportunity to get a lot of exposure, and people will naturally reach out to you. So in this particular scenario, I had studied to get my certification in SHRM, so my SPHR at that point in time. It just so happened that I got my designation. I was actually working in the banking industry in the HR function, and unfortunately, we were going through a downsizing, and I was at the point where we were closing out all of our local offices, and I had begun to do a job search. Still employed, but doing a job search. One of the folks that I met, again through networking, was teaching a class at the University of Washington. And he asked me to come to the first class and just basically talk to the students in terms of how I felt the designation, the certification, the SPHR would help me in my job search. And in honesty, my first reaction was, gosh, the University of Washington, it really isn't on my way home. I had a small infant at the time. And he was like, Nina, it's at the Bothell campus. It's, on your way home. Give me 10 minutes of your time. So I said, certainly. So I attended the first 15 to 20 minutes of the class, and one of the things I mentioned was that I was in a job search and that I felt like this designation would help me. Went on and it gave them a little bit of the path that I had been on to get the certification. And then, went on my merry way home. And then the next day, my networking contact called me and said there was a woman in the as part of the student body who was currently at Nintendo, and somebody from Microsoft had approached her, wondering, basically cold calling her and asking her if she was interested in an opportunity at Microsoft in HR. She wasn't at that time, but I had planted that little seed in her head. And so she had contacted Rick, my networking colleague, and asked if he would be comfortable reaching out to me to ask me if I was interested. So long story short, that's how I ended up at Microsoft. So I love to tell that story because it could very easily have turned out to be a different scenario where I didn't attend, I hadn't networked with him, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. I mean, that's so interesting, right? Where it was, the contact of your contact. So it wasn't even that, your contact knew about it. So that gives you that network effect as you were talking about.
Exactly.
It's the connectedness. I love that. And I love that that's a personal, you have a personal vesting in networking as you've seen it work very well for your career.
Yeah. And Dana, the other thing I'll just mention, too, is that it's worked for me externally, and then it's also worked for me internally. And, what I'll share with you on that topic is I had an interest in doing international work at some point in my career. And so working locally at the corporate office here in Redmond was great. I was having a fantastic time. But I also, as I said, wanted to do something in the international space. And so part of my internal networking strategy was to make sure that as I spoke to other senior HR leaders who were in positions of making some decisions in terms of career movement, that I sort of dropped that little seed into their brain too. And in actuality, and I give people this advice too, is even if it's not the right timing for you, just basically saying at some point, I'd love to do something internationally, that can gain a life of its own. And in the example, again, personal story is I wasn't ready at that point in time, but 6 months later, one of the HR leaders who I'd mentioned that to called me up and asked me, Nina, I have a 6-month assignment in Singapore. Would you be interested? So I think planting those seeds throughout all these networking conversations can lead to many things, and even things that you had never thought would come to fruition.
That's incredible. I love that idea of planting the seeds, right? So you sort of plant that and then you're not sure, when that's going to pop up and take a life of its own, but it can at some future point for you. So I love that. So let's talk a little bit about the basics of networking. Sort of how does someone get started with networking?
Yeah, I think for me, and again, just speaking from personal experiences, you have to have confidence in yourself and you have to know your own strengths. And I think sometimes that can be difficult, especially if you're in job search mode and, maybe you've had some sort of setback and that's impacted your self-esteem. I think we've all been there at some point in our careers. And so do whatever you need to do to pump yourself up. Maybe it's self-talk or maybe it's talking to a trusted advisor. Just getting your level of confidence reset, I think, is super important. The other thing that I would say is take the pressure off yourself and think about it as not searching for something that you need, but make it all about how you can help someone else. After all, a lot of people and you can be a connector yourself. You can offer advice and you can share your perspective. And I think taking a little bit of the pressure off yourself to say, gosh, I need to reach out, I need help, but just turn that around and say, how can I help others? And then the other thing I would say is networking is about building relationships, and those relationships need to be founded on trust, which means that you have to be genuine and authentic. And so again, I think in my mind, it's a little bit about just showing up as yourself and just being who you are and just making those natural connections. The other thing I'll say is, that's all well and good sort of on the psychological standpoint, but you really have to make a concrete plan and then execute on it. And what I mean there is really think about what are your goals for networking. Maybe it is that you're in job search mode, or maybe you're seeking out some sort of mentoring relationship. There could be a variety of reasons, but you could use that filter to determine what networking events you might want to target first. And then I would say when you make your list of events, take into consideration how comfortable you are or not in that type of environment. If networking comes to you naturally, then you can spread your net wider and you can move more quickly. Sort of going into while you're at the event, I would say look for smaller groups of people that you can join. I typically look for a pod of 3. It just makes it easier to join the conversation. And then I would say don't be afraid to join the group. Introduce yourself, because once you introduce yourself, then others will follow suit.
Oh, I love that. So when you talk about events, like what kind of events would this be? Do you have some, for examples that people could think about?
Dan, I think it really, really depends. And so I'm going to go back to, if you feel like you're a natural networker, I think almost going to any event, you're going to feel comfortable and you're going to have success in terms of making connections. I think if you're a little bit more on the introverted side or shy or you haven't done it before, then my advice would be pick a networking event where you're going to feel the most comfortable. So it could be an event where there's a high probability you'll know at least a couple of people. It could be an alumni. The other thing I would suggest, if you're more on the shy side, is pick a networking event that has a topic that you have a lot of passion about. It could be a social gathering. It could be a wine club. It could be a reading club. It could be a car club. I mean, you pick it, whatever you feel more comfortable at, because if the topic of conversation is something that you have a passion about, you're going to feel much more comfortable initiating a conversation with someone who's actually networking as well.
Right, right. I love that idea of it being, a car show or, a wine club. Are there any other sort of surprising places that you think people can network that maybe they're not thinking about as a networking event?
It's almost anywhere. I mean, literally, it could be a coffee shop. It could be an airplane is one where people tend to network with the person next to them. It could be a sporting event. I mean, I've just had, and I will say too, I am not an extrovert. I am more of an introvert. But I feel like when you're in a social gathering or in a place where people are just naturally gathering, a restaurant, a coffee shop, even a bar, it's very easy to turn to the person next to you and just say hello, and a conversation will generate. I'll give you another funny example of networking. I was actually, and this was a couple of weeks ago, it was my boss's 50th birthday, and we were trying to track down some very special type of, I think it was whiskey. I'm not a whiskey connoisseur, but it was some very, very rare type of whiskey. And a couple of us were trying to figure out where could we buy it. And so I just happened to be sitting at the bar waiting for my husband, and there was a young man sitting next to me, and it dawned on me that he was a liquor distributor, and it didn't click for me first. And we started talking about kids, and, he has little ones, and, all yada, yada, yada. And finally, it occurred to me, I should ask him where I can get this whiskey. And so we had a great conversation. He gave me his contact information. And it's just another example of you can network anywhere, or you can network for any reason. And in this case, it was a great thing for me. He probably didn't get much out of it besides the conversation. But, I was able to make a key win in terms of getting the right whiskey.
I love that.
Yeah, to answer your question, honestly, you can network anywhere.
And I love in your example, right, where you're networking, you're thinking about all of those connections as networking. And it's not just about, your next job, but it really is helping to solve a problem. Or the flip side is, you may have had some information in that instance that somebody needed, right? So it goes back to that helping others and, seeking help from that network. It's kind of a different twist on it that I like.
It will come back to you. My other example is I was on a plane a couple of weeks ago coming back from Phoenix, and I had my laptop up and I was working for like 99% of the flight. And literally 10 minutes before we landed, I finally struck up a conversation. There was a really nice young lady sitting beside me, and told me her story of she was a consultant and in the security business, like computer security. And great conversation with her. I just could tell she was highly intelligent. She was traveling a lot. Her husband happened to work at Microsoft. And so I immediately made the connection with her and said, well, gosh, you should have your husband send me your resume. And so now I'm in the process of trying to figure out if there's a good match for her. But there's another example of, for her, networking anywhere may lead her to a job.
Right. I love that. And I love you being sort of open to that, right? Even suggesting that, knowing what role you have, and sort of the access within the company that you might have, and you being willing to share that out. So that goes back to that helping others, right? I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. So we hear a lot about LinkedIn and sort of networking through LinkedIn. What role do you think LinkedIn can and should play in somebody's networking plan?
Well, we are definitely affiliated with LinkedIn now since we acquired them a little while ago.
That's true.
I'm heading down to LinkedIn next week to meet with some of my colleagues down there. I think LinkedIn is a wonderful, wonderful tool. And it's one of those things where when I gave the dictionary definition of networking, I really see it as this web, and the web can expand really, really quickly. And I think LinkedIn is an enabler of that. And so, I guess the cautionary thing is you could very easily get yourself overwhelmed with people that are connecting with you and people that you are connecting with. And so I think you have to be slightly selective in terms of who you want to connect with, how you want to connect with them, LinkedIn in this example, and the reason for connecting. I love to give my LinkedIn information out. I think it's a great way of, especially when you are actively networking with someone face-to-face, in a room or at a conference. For me, the easiest thing to say is, let's get connected on LinkedIn, because then LinkedIn is there. You can pursue that relationship to the depth that you feel is necessary. You can help that person. They can help you. So I'm a big fan of it, and I think it's an enabler in terms of the networking scenarios that we're all involved in.
Right. And I know, I think one of the key pieces for it is, you can see people's work history or know where they are, which is super helpful when you're looking for something specific. I will say that the career queue literally came about because I was looking at maybe going into some consulting work, and Stacy, who is my co-host on the show, I saw she had worked for a particular consulting company that I was interested in, a local company. And so that was my first outreach to her was, hey, I saw that you worked for this company. I want to chat about it. And then we met for a few coffees and a few coffees more, and hence then the career queue was born. But really, our initial outreach to her was about a particular company that she had worked for previously. And then we took clearly a whole different path, and then we launched the career queue together. So,
That's a great story, and it's sparking my mind to say I think it's a great tool in terms of benchmarking too. So for myself, if I want to gain a little bit more knowledge about how another company or person is approaching executive recruiting, as an example, LinkedIn is a great tool to figure out who are those other people, that might be out there facing a similar challenge, and then, connecting with them and having that dialogue.
Yes, great. Well, hey, Nina, let's take a quick break. And then when we come back, I want to talk about how networking can play a role just in your career development outside of finding a new job.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes at thecareerq.com, where you can also subscribe to the podcast and sign up for our newsletter.
Welcome back. We're talking with Nina Johal today all about networking. So, Nina, I'd love to talk a little bit more about what role networking can play in somebody's career development, really just outside of when they want to find a new job. Is there a role for networking in career development?
Absolutely. Dana, I'm trying to think of a personal story that I can relate to this, and nothing is popping to mind at the moment. So, what I will say is I think that networking can lead to many different opportunities. And the one that pops into my head is you could be at a networking event and find an opportunity to either become a mentor or be mentored by someone in a specific area or need that you might have. And so I think there are opportunities in terms of me developing my own career. As I network with someone, I enter into a mentoring relationship with them, or as I said, it could be vice versa, where I feel like there's an opportunity for me to mentor someone or coach someone. And when you mentor someone, I think there's a two-way benefit to that. You learn and they learn. So that's the thing that immediately comes to mind in terms of career development. The other thing I would say is it could lead to volunteer opportunities too. So a volunteer opportunity isn't necessarily finding a new job, but when you take on a volunteer opportunity, obviously you're not only contributing to whatever that organization is, but you're also learning and developing your own skills.
That's interesting to think about, right? That looking out for volunteer opportunities or having those offered to you through your network really can be beneficial. You can grow your skills or get additional exposure that maybe you wouldn't have had before without, having that network offer you that opportunity.
Yeah, and I think when you say exposure, I would interpret that to mean visibility as well. So if you're volunteering in an organization, you become a very visible member of that community. And then just by being a visible member of a community, I think there's many more opportunities for you to make connections with people. And again, those connections can lead to all sorts of different outcomes, if you will.
Right. And I definitely see the role of networking, especially if you are on the job and you're going to take on a new project or a new type of project that you haven't done before. If you know other people in your industry or people know that you've done that, they might reach out, right, to get a little bit of early coaching or give me some words of wisdom type advice that could be a longer term mentorship or really just a point in time, like, hey, let's chat about this as I kick off this project kind of idea.
Yeah, that's so true. And you're making me think of an example now that just popped into my head. And again, I'll relate it to the executive search space. So I'm a member of a organization that is made up of people that have similar roles to myself. And I think the networking opportunity there is alive and well. And there's been many times when I've reached out to others in the industry to say, I am embarking on, trying to solve a challenge around how do you measure ROI for the work that my team does? And, how have you approached this? What do you know? Or just jointly brainstorm on things. So I think, again, this is not seeking a new job. And it really is in the realm of career development and honing my craft in terms of what I do today and trying to get better at that as I network with other people and learn how they're approaching similar challenges.
Right. So what tips do you have for people who don't think that they are networkers?
What I would say is if you don't think you're a natural networker, it doesn't mean you can't be really good at it. It will just take practice and it will take a little bit of bravery. And the other thing I would say is remind yourself that all humans are innately social creatures. And most likely, unfortunately, you've had some experience in your life that might make you a bit more hesitant to put yourself out there, so to speak. And, as I said earlier, using self-talk to sort of bolster up your self-confidence or seeking advice from a trusted advisor who knows you well enough to sort of get you in the right space is going to be really important. And then the other thing I would say is pay particular attention to pre-planning and be specific in what networking events you want to target first. So, and I think I alluded to this earlier, go to the ones where you're going to feel most comfortable and sort of use that as your testing ground. Even before that, practice in the most comfortable environment that sort of suits your lifestyle. Maybe it's the gym, maybe it's the grocery store, but it's really just taking that initial step and talking to people that you don't know when you're in line paying for your groceries or what have you. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at how accommodating and how willing people are to talk to you. And that's what networking is all about.
Right. And so you mentioned, earlier, and then you just mentioned now sort of that pre-planning and that planning. What would you say, what goes into like a networking plan? What would you advise people put into that?
So what I would say is step one is be planful about what events you want to attend and why. We talked a little bit about this. And then also think about what your approach is going to be once you get to the event. I talked a little bit about the smaller group, going for the trio, the three in a pod. It's easier to break into that conversation. The other thing I would say is have a list of 2 to 3 topics that you're passionate about, that you feel confident about, that you want to speak about, that you want to talk to someone about or seek information about it, and know what those are. So you sort of have the list in your head and you're not frozen in the spot. And then I would say is, I said this earlier, introduce yourself. People will introduce themselves to you. It's automatic human behavior. And then don't be afraid to ask people while you're at the event to introduce you to others. People are very, very willing to make those connections. And I would say in my experience, I can't say it's 100% hit rate, but you can kind of read the networking event that you're in. And you want to be in a networking event where people are very open and people are very genuine. There could be events that you just don't feel sort of that vibe, and that's fine and good. You move on and, you don't go again or you go to a different one. So I think you have to sort of read the room and read the environment and make sure you're comfortable with that.
That makes a lot of sense about, being sure that you are comfortable there. So that way you're sort of presenting your best self. Because I would imagine if you're not comfortable, if the individual is not comfortable there, you're just not putting yourself out, you're just not putting your best self out there.
Right. You're going to put so much pressure on yourself that you're probably going to be somewhat limited in terms of how you want to show up. Mm-hmm. The other thing I would say is ask open-ended questions about whatever the topic is that's being discussed. And if it isn't something you're super familiar with, just be curious. Use the names of the people you're talking with. So once they introduce themselves to you, use their names. It's a strategy that becomes very, very engaging. And I think the other thing is when you ask open-ended questions and you're curious about the topic, people love to talk about something they're passionate about. They love to talk about themselves, and that gets to building an authentic and a genuine relationship with someone. So I think that's sort of the basic place to start. And then the other thing I would say is smile and look approachable. Nobody wants to approach someone that's frowning or that looks like they're stressed out. So I think that's the other reason of you've got to make sure that the environment you're in is something that you're comfortable in. And then offer up ideas and offer to connect people to others. Do whatever feels natural to you, but look for an opportunity to help the person that you're speaking with versus trying to sort of flip it the other way, because those opportunities will come to you. It's more about being a resource for others and determining how you can help them with whatever they're working on, and that will flip, and you will sort of you'll yield the effects of that at some point as well. And then the last thing I'll say is post-event follow-up. So any commitments you make to your fellow networkers, make sure you follow up on those. Things like sending a short email acknowledging that you met so-and-so, and maybe you can add in a little bit of what you learned from them, make it personal, and let them know that they can reach out to you.
I like that follow-up piece, right? I mean, it's possibly something people don't think about much from a networking event unless there's like a real specific, that person has a job that I'm interested in, or, that person has something that I need, then of course I'm going to continue to follow up. But maybe if it wasn't that immediate piece, that post-event follow-up could be really useful, as you're saying, sort of, and it could fruit or net something further down the line than what could happen immediately in the room.
Yeah, that's so true. And it could be when somebody hands you a business card, which doesn't happen as often as it used to now, but when they hand you a business card, you get back to your desk, you shoot them off a quick email. That way you're top of mind for them, or they're in, a folder in their email in case they want to reference back, or it's a quick connection on LinkedIn. So you sort of start building your own library, and you go back to that library when you may have a question, or maybe you go back to the library because somebody said, oh gosh, I'm really interested in X, Y, Z, and then you have an opportunity to say, oh gosh, I think I have something that might help that person. And again, it's an ongoing sort of reciprocal event, if you will.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I love how you keep coming back to, it is about helping others, right? If you can help others, then that comes around to you again. But,
absolutely.
Keeping that in mind. So, Nina, I imagine that there is a difference between sort of building a network and, when you're first starting out versus sort of maintaining a network. Do you see a difference? And, are there any different steps or anything different you would advise in either of those situations?
Yeah, there's definitely a difference, and there's also a similarity. And I think in the similarity bucket, it's both take dedication, both take work, and both take planning. And when you're maintaining a network, follow-up and follow-through are very important. So being proactive in maintaining your network, you could be selective, in terms of whom and how often and what that interaction might look like. But if you make a commitment, then absolutely stick to it. In my own network, I have people where we have a mutual commitment to kind of be there. We exchange information on a fairly regular basis. It could be an email article that I know a person would enjoy, that I personally got a lot of value out of, and I'll just shoot it off to a couple people in my network. It could be a job lead that I received that I'd like to pass on. It can be very personal, but I think the main point I would make is having a commitment, follow up, set aside certain time, stick to your commitment. Keeping your network alive is hard work. So have a plan, have a timeline attached to each of the people in your network. And then again, it could be as light as email, an email check-in, or it could be a face-to-face meeting.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about the time commitment that it could take. You could probably spend all your time networking, right? And maintaining that network, but all the rest of us, many of us have full-time jobs and things we need to do. So how do you balance that?
Well, what I would say is, even though I started off by saying networking is a time commitment, it can vary. So you will have a set of people in your network community which are very low maintenance. It is a quick email. Maybe it's every 6 months and it's just a quick little email. It's more about the discipline and then having a commitment to say, okay, every 6 months, here's the 10 people I'm going to shoot an email to. Then I think there's another bucket of people that you interact with more often. Mm-hmm. And I think what I would say, it's what I refer to is, I read this great article, and gosh, I want to share it with, the 4 people in my network that I know have a passion around this, or they're going to love this, or it's going to help them because it helped me. And then doing that's more a little impromptu, but doing it almost immediately. Otherwise, you're probably not going to get to it. So as soon as I read something and I'm like, gosh, Stacy would love this, shooting it off to Stacy immediately. Then I think the final and third bucket is where you spend, I'm going to call it more quality time. So there's probably like 3 or 4 people in I'm going to call it my deep network, where we meet maybe every second month, and it is a face-to-face meeting. It's dinner or it's a glass of wine, and it's almost like a mentoring, peer mentoring network, where I'm talking about specific challenges that I have. The other person's talking about specific challenges she has, and we're actually contracting to say, okay, the next time we meet, we're giving each other advice. The next time we meet, here's what I will commit to do to change the circumstances I'm in or to address the challenge I have. And so that's super beneficial. It's a much more emotional networking connection, but I think those are the types of connections. The more you connect in that way, the deeper the conversations are, and the feedback is very, very rich. And I would say in that category, you're probably going to have just a small handful of people.
Right. Those people that you are sort of consistently engaging with and probably know a bit of way more of your history than some of the others.
Exactly.
And you can go to sort of and call on them, or they can call on you at a somewhat quick pace, right? I love that.
Right. Yep.
So, Nina, thank you so much for chatting with me about networking. I mean, definitely through this conversation, I can see that, it really is networking just is this ongoing process, right? That it takes some time to go deeper with folks, right? And some you just reach out every once in a while, but it's that consistently managing that is so important, not just for, new job seekers, but for, your career development. We had a couple examples there.
Yep.
Wonderful. Well, let's transition our conversation, Nina. And we have a couple of questions that we'd like to ask all of the guests on the Career Q. Helps us get to know you a little bit better. So, Nina, what was your first job?
Well, I actually worked for my parents. And gosh, I was probably like underage in terms of being legally allowed to work. But when you have a family business, you chip in and you do whatever. So that was actually my first job. And, it was a fun one. It was pretty much full time, after school, on the weekends, what have you.
What do you think you learned from that you still use today?
I think what I learned is that you have to feel passionate about your profession or your craft. And if you're in that position, you can very easily pour your whole self into that work. And when I think about what I learned from that for myself, it's to ensure that whatever work I'm doing, I'm truly passionate about, whatever it is, my career, my craft. And my barometer is, or sort of my own sense check is, if I can't get up in the morning 99% of the time and feel really excited to go to work, then I'm probably doing the wrong thing. And I guess the flip side of that is, luckily, 99% of the time I can get up in the morning and feel really excited to come to work. So that's what I learned, is you have to have passion for what you're doing. Otherwise, you're probably not going to give your whole self to whatever that craft or whatever that profession is.
Right. I mean, it is like feeling that drive or that feeling in your stomach where you're like, yep, this is fun. I enjoy what I'm doing.
Yep.
Does make a difference. And as you said, sort of putting your whole self out there and really giving it your all, I think, versus just sort of phoning it in.
Exactly.
For sure.
Yep.
Well, have you read or listened to anything recently that you would recommend to others?
Definitely. And I actually recommended this to a couple of people in my network. It was a TED Talk that I think I listened to a couple months ago. It might have been the January time frame. And it was by an organizational psychologist, Adam Grant, called Are You a Giver or a Taker? And he basically posed that there are three basic kinds of people in every workplace. There's givers, there's takers, and there's matchers. And the thing about matchers, when I thought about this, is that those people are the networkers. And so he offers really simple strategies to promote a culture of generosity and keeping the self-serving employees from taking more of their fair share of work and time. And so I was fascinated by that one. It resonated with me. And, I think when I read or I hear about things that resonate with me, I automatically want to share it with certain people in my network.
That's neat. That's an interesting concept. And then I'm sure you, as a leader of a large organization too, can think about that even just, not just in your profession of, executive recruitment and talent acquisition, but within your own organization when you're leading that, of how that filters through.
Absolutely. There's so many ways to apply it. You could even apply it to your personal life. So just a variety of different takeaways from that particular TED Talk.
Great. Well, I'm going to look up Adam Grant. Okay. I'm going to look that up as soon as as soon as we're out of the studio here. So Nina, this is one of my favorite questions. What would your 90-year-old self say to you? If 90-year-old Nina walked in the door today, what would she say to you?
Oh, gosh. Well, I hope my 90-year-old self would say, I can't believe you're 90 and you sure don't look it.
I love that. Not a day over 80. All good.
Not a day over 80. My mom just turned 92. So my wish is I want to look like my mom when I'm her age, because she certainly does not look her age. And this is a bit of a cliche answer, but it's one that I truly believe in. And it's all about the legacy that I'm leaving behind, not about what job I've had or what title I've held, but it would be more about, wow, what an amazing child you've raised, what a great human you've been, and I can't believe how many people you have helped in so many different ways. That's what I would want my 90-year-old self to be saying to me.
I love that. And it really is sort of, and it's the legacy. And, we've talked about on the Career Q, and we've had other, guests talk about legacy. And, there's sort of the big legacy that you think about that is, if you're the president or you're, some, big role, there's this huge thing out there. But then there's also, what we sort of talked about as like the little L legacy, which is your family and your friends and the network you were able to create and just the impact you had on your circle and sort of the ripple effect of that.
Exactly. Yep.
So I love that. I love that. Wonderful. Well, Nina, this has been so fun to have you come on the Career Q today. So thank you. If our listeners want to learn more about you or get in touch with you, what is the best way for our listeners to do that?
I think LinkedIn is probably the best and easiest and most efficient way. So I welcome anyone to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can do an easy search on Nina Johal and I'll pop up, and you can go ahead and send me an email, and I'd love to chat further.
Great. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Nina. And I hope all of our listeners go out there and start networking.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I've had a wonderful time chatting with you.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to thecareerq.com where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles to today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a rating and a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again.
The Career Q podcast is produced by Lens Group Media and recorded at Mohair Studios in Seattle's Queen Anne neighborhood.